believe that Visa can surpass this strong domestically and internationally and still grow as a leading EPS company in the world. So what we're looking at the case today, we see that it's a network industry issue about this recommending a strategic movement for Visa, and that involving what we've come up with as a preventive and growth strategic route for Visa in the short and long run. So for the next slide, we are going to, so our stance is that we want to secure and surpass this strong without sacrificing through price war. So looking at the situation that we have to go through right now, we can see that Visa's competitiveness is being threatened by the CUP, or Chinese Union Pay, expansion internationally. Why is it a problem? First of all, we see that CUP unfair practice within China itself has posed a very big threat for Visa's expansion domestically in China. Moreover, its expansion in network worldwide or globally has posed also a threat internationally to Visa. Another point is in terms of CUP's international movement, which the way that the movement that they've made in terms of pricing strategy and in terms of product offering has posed a big threat to the industry as a whole in terms of proposing a price war. Moreover, Visa has a lingering complication within the US itself as the duopoly issue that there's been going on between Visa, MasterCard, and the US. So the logic flow that we're looking at today, first, within China itself, we see that CUP owns foreign transaction channel has posed a threat because they've already joined with us at first for the Visa and CUP to transact the foreign transaction. However, they've also launched their own CUP foreign transaction, which again eats up this market of foreign transactional customers, and we see that as a threat. Moreover, the administrative barrier proposing by the Chinese government to facilitate CUP to compete within the country unfairly has been a very big threat for Visa to expand domestically in China. In terms of international market, we see that moreover, since CUP is growing into South Korea, into Australia, and we see that that can also be a threat for Visa's international market, because even though we hold the highest volume of transaction in the world, but we're seeing that that can erode with the price that Union Pay is proposing. So for the recommendation that we're proposing right now, we have 5 strategies. The first strategy is that we want to push WTO to accelerate the movement in lowering the barrier in ESP industry in China. Moreover, we also want to enhance an efficiency internally to increase the network of Visa. And also, we want to strengthen the competitive advantage in network to increase the customer base in Asia Pacific, because we see that that is really has a huge potential as a growing market. Fourthly, we also see that it's very important to boost promotional effort, because that's one of the factors that customers decide based on which card provider they want to go with in terms of benefit, accumulating benefit that they can earn in the long run. And that also relates to the switching costs that we're going to be explaining. And lastly, we want to highlight their superior and security so that we can engage non-carded holder to become carded holder Visa, because we think that this is another strength that we have as to propose a very high security, and this can also be something that non-carded holder can also look at, and also as a factor to change our mind to switch to hold card.
I would talk about first and second strategy, while my colleagues would talk about other leftover strategies, that 3, 4, and 5 strategies. Well, our first strategy is to push the WTO to accelerate the movement in lowering the barrier in EPS. The rationale of doing so, we have 2 rationale. First of all, is that Chinese market in the card transaction is big, is prominent, both in terms of size and in terms of growth. If you could see from the graph here, from 2009 to 2010, the growth of card transaction is keep growing and growing and growing. Moreover, the number of total financial usage of card in China is accounted for about 50% of total card usage worldwide. So in this case, we could not turn away from Chinese market, and Chinese market is still prominent for Visa. Secondly, but the problem is that there is still some barrier in this country, in this interesting prominent market. So we see that it is really important to find a way to remove such a regulation that prevent the foreign EPS from doing so. The current regulations that they have in China is that first, the regulation that retain foreign EPS from doing the ATM card transaction, the debit card, and also the prepaid payment, and also that if foreign EPS would like to issue the credit card, it needs to go through CUP. So we see that this is a barrier for Visa to join and to profit from this prominent and interesting market. So therefore, this is a rationale of trying to push and accelerate WTO to reduce the barrier in this market. So let's see how are we going to doing so. Well, of course, we could not go direct through WTO. We have to lobby the US government to accelerate the process to WTO to implement, to let Chinese government implement the regulation that will reduce the barrier. So we would cooperate with other EPS providers, such as MasterCard and other US providers to lobby the government, and we would try to convince the government that CUP is a really big threat to EPS industry, and if the government wouldn't do something, then the US EPS industry would be in threat. We would provide them with the reasons such as CUP start to provide a non-renminbi transaction that is currently erodes the market share of the US EPS, and currently they have partnered with many banks in very many countries, especially in Asia Pacific region, which that is put a threat to US EPS provider. Let's move on to the second strategy. We would improve the transaction system in order to improve the efficiency in operation. Well, let me explain like this. The current system is that when customer pay, it goes to a retailer, and retailer sends the order to the EPS, and EPS send another order to the retail bank. So we see that if you could shorten the time of doing this with the EPS and the bank, and if we could shorten the time, then the retailer could get money faster. So that, well, the rationale of doing so is that first it would improve and enhance the efficiency in operation. Definitely it would help improve reducing the operation expense. If you could reduce the time of operation, then your operation expense would be reduced. Secondly, and this is the most important rationale of doing so, is that we would put more incentive on the retailers to join the Visa. Why? First is that if you improve the system, improve the efficiency, you reduce the transaction time, so that the retailer would get money faster. They would get cash faster than before, so they have more working capital that they could use to pursue, and that could help improve the liquidity of retailers. So this would put more incentive on the retailers to join us, to join Visa. And if customers see that many retailers have joined Visa, then they would have incentive to use Visa. And that, we believe, that would create the competitive advantage over CUP. So again, we shorten the times of transaction. The implementation is that half of the first year we would observe the system, the whole system, which part has a problem, which part we could reduce the time on transaction, and then later on we would try to implement the system on that particular area.
So moving on to the next strategy, which is to strengthen the Visa's competitive advantage of network. Because now Visa has a vast network, so it is a competitive advantage that will get customers to use Visa instead of CUP. So the rationale behind this is that first, Visa is used in 200 countries around the world, while CUP is used only 117 countries around the world. So this is clearly a competitive advantage because it takes a lot of time to build networks and to contact retailers and get more retailers to use CUP. So we think that this is a rationale that why consumers would choose Visa over CUP. So the second rationale is that there is a substantial increase of the number of Chinese outbound travelers. So in 2010, there were only 53 million travelers from China going overseas. But in 2011, it is expected to be 65 million travelers. So this is a 15% increase of number of travelers. And it's expected to increase to 100 million travelers by 2020. And the number of value of the payments that they make overseas is substantial. There is the total number of 33.1 billion US dollars of these Chinese travelers spending overseas. So this means that it is a big potential market that we could, if the network is fast enough, we can increase the incentive for these travelers to use Visa instead of CUP because there is a vast network. So the third rationale is that China is expected to be the #1 inbound travelers to the US within 10 years. What does this say? So several million travelers are expected to go to the US. And how does that benefit Visa? Because CUP hasn't yet managed to contact retailers or make a connection, make a network in the US yet. So with this competitive advantage that we have in the US, this means that this is a potential, this is a complete competitive advantage for Visa to induce Chinese travelers who want to go to the US and all countries around the world to use Visa instead of CUP. And the fourth reasons is that consumption per capita for the Chinese travelers in the US for Chinese people is $7,200 per person for the Chinese travelers, while other international travelers, they only spend roughly $4,200 in the US. So this means that we cannot neglect the Chinese travelers who go out to the US or go out to other countries. With this potential market and with the competitive advantage in the network that we have done and will do with the second strategy that will be implemented, this means that we can utilize the competitive advantage to capture the opportunity of the big Chinese travelers market. So moving on to the next strategy, which is to boost the promotional effort of Visa. The rationale behind this is that the first reason is that antitrust case. Because Visa and MasterCard is being sued for colliding together. This means that, and Visa has lost the case. So this means that the price of Visa, the fee has to reduce because it lost the case. So with the reduction in price, revenue which comes from price times quantity, it potentially means that the quantity has to be increased. And how do we do it? We'll do it by promotional efforts. The second strategy is the collusion with MasterCard. This also poses a threat. Is another reason why we could not increase price and has to increase quantity through the use of promotional efforts. The third rationale behind this is to utilize the vast and long established network with retailers and create and differentiate from CUP by creating promotional efforts through the means that I'll talk about later. It will incentivize people to use Visa instead of CUP. The fourth reason is to increase the switching cost, because if people use Visa, and it means that they have one card, and will use the promotional efforts to means, and it will increase the switching cost for people to switch from Visa to CUP. So for the card issuers, we'll incentivize them by having point collection And people tend to want to collect a lot of points on one card so they can get something back, the rewards. So if we can get them to use Visa through the strategy 2 and 3, this means that it increase the switching cost from them to switch from Visa to Cup. And also retailers will connect with the retailers and then tell them to give them, offer them some deals and then have them lower their price for consumers that spend through them using Visa. So this will encourage people to use Visa and spend through those retailers. So eventually, this will increase the number of usage of Visa card holders. So the last strategy is to highlight their superior security system to draw non-carded customers. This is because Asia Pacific is a huge, huge market, but there is still a limited number of card holders and the number of card transactions in Asia Pacific is still low. The proofs are, first, the low use of card payment in China. The number of transactions that are spent in cards is only 18% of the total transactions that are used in China, while the paper-based transactions is 80%. And the growth year on year for the card holders, for the card issuers, card transactions is 14.5%, while the expected CAGR, which is the compound annual growth rate, is 22.43%. This means that there is also potential further increase of the year-on-year number of transactions further. And also, there is a high value of payment through cards. Card transactions, although it accounts for only 18%, but it accounts in value of 43.7%, while the paper-based, which accounts for 80% of number of transactions, accounts for only 50% of the value. So this means that the value of card transaction, the average value of card transaction is much higher than the paper-based transaction. If we can get people to spend more on card, this means that it will potentially increase the EPS market even further.
Moving on to the financials. With all this strategy, we expect that the service revenue would decrease, the growth rate of service revenue would decrease from 13% to 8%, because given the ongoing pressure on the price reduction. However, we can reduce operating expense by improving our efficiency. Therefore, we expect that the growth rate of operating expenses would decrease to only 4%. However, we propose promotional strategies which will increase our client incentives. With all this strategy, we expect that the operating income would be $11 trillion in 5 years, and the growth rate of operating income would be 10%. Therefore, all of the strategy that we have proposed today prove that the strategy will lead to the sustainable growth of Visa. So far for our case, we have proposed, as I said, we want to secure the market. We also want to surpass our competitor without sacrificing through price war. So what have we done so far? We've carefully looked at both sides of the network industry, which being the retailer side and the customer side, because those interact within each other. So on the customer side, what we want to do is that we want to increase the network as an incentive for them to hold the card, because that's one of the basis that they make decision upon. Moreover, in terms of, we would also promote their spending through promotional effort. And besides that, we also expand to new territory by highlighting our security value so that it could ensure these customers that Visa is the safest and Visa is the best for them to use over other competitors. On the retailer side, which means that they are also our customers, what we've done is that we have facilitate their financial system by allowing more working capital, by improving our internal system so that it could facilitate them and make them receive the money faster so that they have more working capital to work and to finance their business. So on both hands, we have increased the incentive for them to use MasterCard. And this has been strengthened our competitive advantage in terms of networking, which will surpass our competitors being even MasterCard and UnionPay. Moreover, we also want to, in terms of MasterCard, as my colleague has already said, that we do not want to alone lower our price without the US regulations because it could promote price. Yes. Thank you so much.
So that's 20 minutes. Now we should proceed to the Q&A session. With your 4 or 5 strategies that you have proposed, do you have any timelines for those? Like, because as Emma has mentioned, it seems that you have a lot to do, in the next couple of years. So how are you going to prioritize that? Any reasons behind your prioritization?
I feel that many of the strategies can be implemented together at the same time or start right now. For example, some of the values that we already have, such as, we already have the tight security system, and just a matter of promoting and really point out to customers that this matters, this can secure them and ensure them that they can use the card without the fear. In terms of enhancing promotional effort, it could also be more budget adding to the current promotional effort that we're doing in terms of adding incentive. However, in terms of doing the internal change, right, the system change, that may need preparation, may need some time of planning. But we believe that after a year, they could still be able to effectively implement this and give the effect to kick off. So we think that a few of the things can be doing together. In terms of prioritization, I think that, for example, in case of WTO and dealing with the unfair competition in China, the effect has already finalized. However, there is an estimate that even though China at the end will have to collaborate and will have to lower their barriers in this EPS market within China for us, but because they're posing administrative barriers, and we think that that could prolong the process and for EPS market to be fully liberalized for about 5 years. So what we're simply doing here is just put more effort to accelerate the process. But we think that it will come. However, the sooner is the better. Yes.
How do you cope with the problem that Master and American Express is taking advantages because of the Visa and Chinese Union Pay relationship is getting worse and worse now? They're trying to tie up more relationships. So the number of cards they issued, the co-branded card is increasing. So how do you cope with this problem? Do you have any ideas on it?
We suggest we still foster the relationship of Cup in the Visa, because we as I said before, the Chinese market is still the prominent. So we suggest them to still foster the relationship within China, but we also suggest that internationally we would create the competitive advantage in terms of networks and in terms of system that would make our retailers and customers would use more on Visa.
To add on to that point, I mean, it falls into the same category as Visa Cup, which is a existing collaboration of Visa and Cup for foreign transaction versus Cup foreign transaction line itself. It falls into the same category. So even though we have other competitors, it still comes back to what advantage we have to provide them to be able to spend internationally better, quicker, more effective. And we think that that comes down to what we're trying to propose at the end, which is providing network, providing security, and to really emphasize to them that if they go anywhere in the world, Visa card is accepted.
So on this relationship between Visa and Cup, I think that at the moment Visa is trying to get for the outside of China payments still the exclusivity that it had in its previous agreement to be enshrined that would go through Visa rather than through Cup. Is that something that you would try and insist on, or would you go the other way and actually drop that and just try and rely on the service offerings that you've mentioned?
Oh, in terms of Cup competing with Visa Cup, right?
Well, there's another area where you've got tension in your relationship with China Union, isn't it, at the moment?
Yes, I understand that concern, and it's one of our concern as well. So we think that in this case, even though the tension might be rise between Cup and Visa Cup, However, the tension was already there to begin with. And the collaboration actually still gives CUP advantage in this case. Like, even if people transact through Visa CUP still gets part of the margin, you know, they still get part of the money. So if they are gonna be totally relying on themselves, then they would lose this chunk of money. And given the fact that customer is the key to this network industry here, so whichever card customer ends up choosing, whichever card customer think that they could use it for sure abroad, that they can actually the card will be accepted, that is the key at the end. So I think that comes down to, again, the same point. Yes.
We have time perhaps for one more question. If there is no more question, we'll call this session an end, okay?
Thanks very much.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done.
Well done.
Well done.